You are very welcome along to Off the Bull. We're here every week chatting through The Last Dance, streaming here in Ireland on Netflix every Monday morning. We've got Off the Ball's Ronan Mullen here. We've got Kerry football and Tralee basketball legend Kieran Donaghy here. And the host of Irishman Abroad, Jarlath Regan, is with us too. Also host of an Irishman Abroad Inside Basketball. Lads, you're all very welcome. We've got to start with two things here. I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe Kieran, you can go first with what you're wearing here. We'll get on to you, Jarlath, in a moment. What is that, Kieran?
That's my Irish team tracksuit when I was captain of Ireland as about a 5'8" or 5'9" 16-year-old, and it's actually it's too big for me now. So I know there's a picture. It was on my Laker Gale of me accepting the award, the trophy from in the Four Nations when we beat England in the final, and the sleeve of this thing is down around nearly my wrist. So whether they gave the culture you buy from Kerry the wrong size on purpose, I don't have a clue what's going on. But I was captain and I was the smallest player in the team, and there's no way I should have had something like this on me at all. So, but it was from 98, 99, 98. So I just said that we're talking a lot about 98, 97, 98 in the season. That was the time where my basketball interests were peaked. So I only came across it when I was rooting out the prizes from my the jerseys for my GoFundMe campaign for Dan, Do It for Dan. And I came across this. I didn't realize I put it away all these years ago. So I said, yeah, time to throw it back on again.
Jarlath, what are you sporting?
This is the warm-up jacket from when I was captain of the Bulls when I was 15 years old. Yeah, no, lads, this is just part of the kind of stuff that I own to wear around the house.
no better thing to wear around.
To wear it. Yeah, while watching this, that's what you do.
Before we get into this week's documentary, I just see you've got Roland Lazenby's book over your shoulder there. You had him on the podcast last week. Any nuggets from that for people who haven't heard the show?
Yeah, well, the show isn't released yet. I guess we're trying to backlog as many episodes as possible and then release it kind of as a binge so that everybody can enjoy them. And I had Pat Burke on the week before. Pat is obviously the only Irish-born person ever to play in the NBA. His is fascinating, but Roland obviously is key to this because, I mean, his book, Blood on the Horns, for me is the inspiration for this. This Last Dance doesn't happen without that. And obviously with the footage that was kept under wraps. And I guess he spoke a little bit more about what Kieran mentioned last week, about how, yeah, they can paint Krause as the villain, but every turn this takes, you're going to see that Krause really engineered this. That this week we did see Krause, as Lazenby said, have the light bulb moment of Tex Winter's triangle is going to work here. The triangle is, so that does emanate from Krause. He had a bunch of stuff though, I'll be honest with you. I don't want to ruin any of it because he had so many little insights, including a lot of stuff about American history and racism, because I kind of put it to him about Jordan saying, Republicans also buy sneakers, is one of his most infamous quotes. And why, if he was driven by rage, as we know Jordan was, driven by chip on his shoulder, vendetta, anger actually was his fuel, then why did he feel no anger towards the system, the situation that he found himself in? Let's not forget, Public Enemy are number one. There's so many other great basketball icons like Bill Russell and Kareem that stood up. Why didn't he? It really is a puzzle. And in that, Roland Lazenby has probably done more research on this than any other person in the world, kind of dug into the depth of racism in North Carolina and how people from there tended towards believing that business success was all they could hope for.
I really hope we get that in The Last Dance as well. Like, I'm not sure how 3D a picture we're going to get of the whole thing. There is obviously a big theory out there that perhaps Jordan is just simply apolitical in a lot of what he says and the way he thinks. So that could be a simple enough explanation. In terms of episode 3 and 4, Ronan, we might start with you. What did you make of this? I thought this was fairly spectacular. I think Denis Rodman is a subject matter that is never going to disappoint, for example.
Yeah, and amazing. And I think one of the concerns a lot of people from the outside looking in would have had about this when they saw a 10-part documentary is that there could be a lot of filler here, try and stretch it out. Was there a need for 10 episodes? I think from the first 4 and from these 2 in particular, you see that they've actually left a lot on the cutting room floor. There was stuff they could have delved into more. with Denis Rodman in particular. And we mentioned off air, like he's a case study for a couple of decades now. People probably know his story in depth to this point. So they had to decide which bits to focus on. But his story growing up, like the amount of siblings he had is like, I think he says his siblings are in the 40s. Like it's a crazy family that he's come from, and that his sisters were actually the basketball prodigies growing up. He wasn't an athletic freak by any means. And similarly to Jordan and Pippen, he had a growth spurt late on, went to college as a freshman at 22, you know, all this kind of crazy stuff. And much like Jordan and Pippen, as I said, kind of had the touch of smaller players, but like the frame of bigger players. He had like the hustle of a 5'10" player when he was walking around at 6'7", and that stood to him so much. Like they framed it really well, how like much of a fulcrum he was to that Pistons team, and then ultimately he was a crucial part of that second strand for the Bulls too.
Kieran, what do you make of Denis Rodman and what his greatest strength was as a basketball player?
To be honest, Owen, like, you know, Jordan was my idol growing up, but I modeled my game when I realized I couldn't be Jordan because I just wasn't good enough. I modeled my game on Denis Rodman. I had more Rodman posters in my room than I had Jordan. I had very little of Pippen actually when I was thinking back about this last night. Rodman was my guy. I liked him in Detroit. I liked the bad boys, even though they were going against Jordan. I liked how they played, and I grew fonder of them as it went on. But for me, Rodman was, you know, he's the glue guy, and I love the way Gary Payton put it. Like Gary Payton said, he's the fuck up person.
Yeah.
You know, he's the guy who just messes with everything, and he could guard Joe Dumars, who's probably one of the best two-guard defenders in the history of the NBA. Really strong, solid guy. Maybe in this day and age, no, he might be a bit too small, but back then he was 6'4". He was perfect next to Isaiah Thomas and a really good defender. And to hear him talking about Denis Rodman's defensive ability, you know, Rodman was wild. What I loved about him, and I had an American coach, Russ Bradford, who coached us. He brought over an American one time. And he told me this guy's got the quickest second jump ever, and I was kind of like, "What do you mean the quickest second jump?" And he was like, "Look, you'll see after a few training sessions." The guy's name was Chris Thompson from Louisiana, 6'8", long. But yeah, like Russ said, and like Rodman said, if you looked at the first 4 or 5 rebounds they showed of Rodman last night, he had 5 tips in one of them in an NBA game against Charles Barkley. He tipped it. So the second jump is when the ball's in the air that you get down and get back up before the other guy. Then he tipped it again, he tipped it again, he tipped it again. Then they showed one in college. He tipped it 3 times or 4 times around the basket. So that second jump is how he was able to be such a good rebounder. And then, you know, his athletic ability and the way Jordan and the guys spoke about him, that it took him 4 laps to catch this guy. Like, you know, he was just going to throw himself out there. He was going to die for the cause. He didn't care about offense. You know, I never really cared too much about offense either. In either sport I played, it was all about just trying to win. And I think Rodman realized very quickly after his first few seasons, and when he came out of college, he was scoring 26, 27 points because he was just a freak athlete by the time he left college. And I think when he went to the NBA, he realized his offensive game wasn't good enough. But what he did realize is, okay, I can be the best defensive player in the game. I can be the best rebounder in the game. And I can influence the game just as much as a guy that's scoring 30 points. And that's what I loved about watching him, and just the way he just go get it. He just went after everything. He was, as I said, look, I did model a lot of my game on him. I still do. For me, it's all about rebounds and defense when I'm playing with the Warriors. And I think he was very much that guy on this Bulls team and the Pistons team. And you know, when I was looking back at these stats last night, his 2 years in San Antonio were off the charts: 17 rebounds, 17.3 and 16.9 a game, with a team that he didn't really get on with. So he's just a freak of a guy, and an unbelievable gel guy to help you win championships, which he has 5 of them, and probably could have 1 more.
Jarlath, what's your take on Denis Rodman when you're wearing your Chicago Bulls memorabilia? Is it just this guy is an icon in your mind, or how do you view him?
I was really like, when they signed him, like every Bulls fan was like, this is never going to work. This is never going to work. I was as shocked as anyone. I was like, they hate this guy. Like, everyone hated this guy because, as Gary said, he was the fuck shit up guy. If people aren't aware of what that term is, he's the fella who you'd play against in a Gaelic football match who was shite at football, but made it impossible for you to concentrate on what you were trying to do just by his sheer annoyance, like a bug buzzing around your head the whole time. And I hated him. Like, I absolutely hated him, and I couldn't understand the signing at all. And I thought this will either blow up or this will be the greatest thing they ever did. Personally, I'm not that interested in him.
Right.
I'm not that. I'm not. I was like, I didn't share the anticipation people had for the Rodman episode, because I feel like a lot of the antics aren't that. There's not that nowadays. Really, you dyed your hair, you got some tattoos. That's not a big deal anymore. You know, his sometimes the whole antics around it, of going to Vegas, of wanting to party, be a party boy. You know, there's no big explanation or theoretical underpinning of any of that. A lot of it was just, I want to have a good time. And
was it not him escaping, Jarlath? Was it not him escaping when he's sitting there with a gun in his car in Detroit and he's depressed? Was it not was all this a kind of a release for him to be different? He wanted to be different, and maybe he felt he couldn't do it, and then he just kind of got to the point where, geez, I was about to blow the head off of myself. Do you know what? I'm going to be me, and I'm going to party and dye my hair and do whatever I want, and you can all just get along with it. He said at one stage last night he felt like a 10-year-old again, because he is a big kid.
Yeah, like, to me, when I heard about that stuff back in the 90s, and even the more it wore on, the more books I read, the more I was like, this is somebody with a mental health issue, and addiction.
Yeah,
is
very possibly undiagnosed.
Phil didn't try and get him into rehab. Nobody actually tried to address what was underneath. Everybody just went, well, sure, look, if he wants to have a few pints, let him off for 48 hours. I mean, if there was a player in the Kerry team who you knew had an actual problem and had come close to suicide, it would be absolutely controversial if it ever emerged that the Kerry management gave him a vacation to Vegas in the middle of the season, rather than actually trying to get him help in the direction he needed it. That wasn't what he needed. He didn't need a vacation. He needed an intervention. Now, who's to say? I guess the balance that there was, the equation that was done there was, well, if we do that, will that completely ruin his season? Or do we do this and we can keep him kind of tipping over and we can still win the championship? It's a very calculated Machiavellian business decision at the end of the day.
Well, it's very, very, very interesting point, Jarlath. While I'm saying this, Kieran, if you wouldn't mind turning your phone around landscape, as we can get a good look of the jerseys there behind you. But like, that's really interesting, Jarlath. Like, I mean, and I think it kind of points to everybody involved in the whole Bulls organization, not just Jackson, but also Jordan and the enabler that he was here. He thought to himself, well, the best way we can get all of Denis Rodman for all of the playoffs and all his under the boards ability is to allow him to release that valve for a couple of nights. And who cares what he does for those couple of nights? I will personally go to his hotel room to remove him from this situation as long as we are winning.
Well, it was probably their only option, really, Eoin. Was it like, you know, I know what Jarlath's saying is actually the right thing to do. And of course, in hindsight, it probably would have been better for him. But when a person goes into rehab or tries to get help, and I actually agree with Jarlath, he's probably on the verge of bipolar, probably has bipolar, but back in the day, none of these things were kind of really, you know, to the fore, and people didn't talk about them, and people didn't admit that they were. There's nothing wrong with being bipolar, you know, it's a condition, you know, there's medication there to help. And I'm sure if it was nowadays, Rodman would be a lot calmer of a character. He'd be on medication and he'd probably be still playing. Whereas a person that wants help, you can't force somebody into help. Somebody has to reach the lowest point where they need to look for help, and or do what Denis did, which was, you know, come to the verge of taking their own life, and then actually said, you know what, I'm just going to be me, and everyone's just going to have to get on with it, no matter what I do, whether I wear dresses or dye my hair. But you know, the Bulls had no option at that stage. I'd say Phil and Michael were like, you know, there's no way Jordan being the kind of competitive, like, there's no other guy in that squad would have got away with that. So Jordan obviously felt this guy just needs it. He needs this pressure valve release. He's really been locked in. He's been really good for a few months. Scotty's back now. You know, he can take a week or whatever turned into. They never really elaborated how long it took for Jordan to go into the hotel room to himself and Carmen Electra to get him out of there. But, you know, that was probably the only option for them to kind of keep Rodman dialed in, as mad as it seems. And, you know, and these are the characters that just aren't going to be ever in the game anymore, because you just can't get away with that type of lifestyle. But, you know, that was his release valve. And he was, you know, especially in Chicago, more so in San Antonio, he started to change. He dyed his hair blonde like your man in Demolition Man, Wesley Snipes. And that's when it all kind of really started kicking in, him being himself and him being a real rebel.
And Madonna.
Because under Chuck...
It seems that she has the piece of advice for him, which was you can be whatever you want to be. And that was the thing that inspired a lot of that. It was
like the assistant coach talking to him in Detroit, talking to Rodman. And Chuck Daly went over and just said, just leave him alone. Don't put a saddle on a Mustang. You know, just leave the guy off. Just leave him do what he does. But every coach, in fairness, like most coaches, probably bar the San Antonio experience and the Mavericks experience, just they couldn't handle him. But the guys that could handle him, the Chuck Dalys and the Phil Jacksons, you saw what they got out of him. They got 5 championships out of him. So it just shows you that there's not part of.
Go ahead.
No, I just. Nowadays in sport, it's kind of paint everybody with the one brush. We must all do it this way. There's no space for any Rodmans or any guys that want to be different or want to do their own thing. I think everybody now is painted with the same brush. You must do this. You must be on time. There's no, you know, that's the way sport has gone in the modern era. Whereas back then it wasn't, and it was the guys that could handle him and give him the rope when they needed to. Probably got the best out of him.
I think there was part of Phil that's identified in it that Phil saw himself in Denis, and I'm not sure how much Phil put on psychotherapy, on clinics. I think that the sense I got and the sense I get from reading around Phil Jackson was that, you know, he does believe in the spirit and actually that Native American stuff ahead of science. In many ways, he probably felt, like he said, that he was this type of member of the tribe. And the sense I get, I don't know if you share this, is that Phil probably taking Denis on was a kind of a project, just in the sense that here's somebody who needs help, and I have all of this philosophical stillness, presence, the shots of them doing yoga. These are all things that will benefit him. And he, I don't know if you agree with this, but he's such a teacher that I would imagine that Phil's approach was, this guy's making great progress. He has to be allowed 2 days off from that progress. And that maybe rather than sending him to Priory or somewhere at the Betty Ford clinic, that actually being with the Bulls and giving him the focus and the structure that he needed was actually the best thing he could do for him.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. And I definitely think it's portrayed as kindred spirits here when it comes to Jackson and Denis Rodman. Ronan, what did you make of the whole Rodman story and the way it's portrayed, at least in episode 3 of The Last Dance?
Yeah, and like as we said last week, Jackson is probably as interesting a person in this whole story as anybody, and it ties as much into Rodman as anybody. And he describes him as Hyoka in the Native American scope, which directly means sacred clown. And I think that kind of encapsulates what people thought of Denis Rodman in the 90s. But I think we got a real insight into the little, not so much a macro level, but what made him tick on a micro level. And you saw it with the cigar story with Michael Jordan, where he got fouled out of a game, and rather than going up and saying, I'm sorry, he went over to his hotel room and asked for a cigar. That was his way of saying sorry. He probably couldn't bring himself to do it in a conventional way. And then you saw about his first meeting with Phil Jackson, where Phil walked in and Rodman didn't stand up, and Phil Jackson asked him to stand up, and that kind of set the tone for their relationship as well, I thought. And even Kieran mentioned it, like his rebounding was off the charts, and people would probably put that down to bloody mindedness. Like it's kind of a disrespected element of basketball in the grand scheme of things, where people probably are more interested in the finesse of shooting and passing. But like the way he talked about the science of rebounding, where he studied Larry Bird's shot and he knew what way it spun and what way it would rebound off the boards, like that's next level stuff. I can't imagine there were too many players thinking on that level. So I think we all knew the macro story, but on this one we got a real insight into the little fundamentals that made him tick.
Yeah, he's an unbelievably good reader of the game. That's the thing that I learned about Denis Rodman. I probably should have known it already. And I think there's definitely truth in the fact that all the scandal, and I have that in inverted commas, around the mid-90s is well known about Denis Rodman. There's not a whole pile new that we could have been told over the course of the last 2 episodes. And I think the same goes for the Detroit Pistons. I'm not sure if I'm stepping out of line by saying that. Like, I'm sure we've seen the Bad Boys 30 for 30. It's not a whole pile in the last 2 episodes that tell us anything new about Isaiah Thomas and Lambier and Rodman when he was playing for them. Is there anything else that we took from the Detroit Pistons storyline?
I had my hands in the air a little bit for both of these episodes in terms of where's this unseen footage? I mean, what are we seeing here? Like, I was a little disappointed, if I'm honest, guys. Like, I think that they probably explained it a little bit in that Denis waves them off a lot in that unseen footage. He's forever gone, I'm not talking, no comment. Go on, move along. And maybe that's why, but what have we seen in terms of this unseen footage? If they had unseen footage from the Pistons time, now that really would have been something. But instead, we saw people getting on planes. We saw Scott Burrell being told that he's an alcoholic. I mean, I didn't see any, like this footage was the justification for making this series. We saw about 3 minutes in each episode. And yeah, you're right. And again, the Detroit thing, it's been covered. So unless you're adding something new, it's hard to see the justification for it. That said, anytime they do a montage of Jordan scoring 50 points, I drop the pen and I'm like, this is great. I'll watch this all day.
Oh, 100%. Like, we're not, like, I don't think anybody here is for 1 second suggesting this is badly produced or is not enjoyable. It's like, as a piece of journalism, what are we actually learning? Like, I'm not sure if you're going to disagree with that, Kieran, or what do you reckon?
I am really, because I think most of the unseen footage is going to come at the end of the documentary. I think they're trying to, this is called The Last Dance, and yeah, we all have a good insight into basketball people, but after all, it's going to be on Netflix. You know, people that might tune into this mightn't, you know, I didn't have a clue about how many tigers people kept in a cage until I watched that bullshit, The Tiger King. Do you know what I mean? So there could be people that sit on and say, you know, Michael Jordan, I've heard of this guy before, I might watch this. You can't turn on Michael Jordan and watch the 98, 97 season with a load of footage and get a real story. You have to get the background. You have to get his struggles against Detroit. You have to get how hard it was for him as a rookie, how the pain barriers he went through. You know, little interesting things about when they last, you know, in the 89 series, how they, you know, went straight to the weight room. I like that. The montage you're talking about, I think Kieran Shannon, who wrote my book, he's a big Prince man, and Party Man came on last night and Jordan was killing in it, like, and it was one of the best. I thought it was one of the best of the night. But I also liked the Jordan rules. You know, we all heard about the Jordan rules, and it was all like just slam Jordan to the ground, you know, which is what my variation of the Jordan rules was. But, you know, the way the assistant coach kind of explained it, you know, it made more sense, and how they were able to enforce as much pain as they were. And on Jordan, forced him to the middle when he's at the wing. So when you're going out guarding the wing, he's not going baseline because he was pretty unstoppable going baseline. When he's at the top, force him left. They're all little triggers that all the other guys, especially the big guys that are at the back of the defense, are going, he's at the top, I need to get in a position now because they're going to force him left. So if he beats him left, I need to be there to help or smash him, which is what they were pretty good at. You know, and the trap coming from high when it went into the post, no baseline allowed. And I like the way they said, well, what happened if he did go baseline? And they said, well, Lambier or Mulholland will get him. So it's, you know, I liked a bit of insight into that side of things. But, you know, it was the Doug Collins bit was nice too. I always remember watching Doug Collins, you know, not knowing too much about that era really. And I felt I know a lot more about it after watching the documentary from last night. Just, you know, how Jerry Krause maneuvered Doug Collins out in the end, how he was really good for the Bulls and how the Bulls liked him, but, you know, felt they could only take him so far.
I mean, that happened at Toronto. They lost their coach a couple of seasons ago. A guy who got them to the Eastern Conference Finals, and that was seen as huge. Like, what does a coach have to do in the modern NBA other than get to a conference finals, be a couple of games away from the finals? That I thought they'd glossed over that a little bit. Like, I would have liked it. Not like Doug Collins was very like, oh, I sensed the end was coming, but like that had to be big, and maybe that showed us a little bit of Phil that they didn't want us seeing. Maybe that was just something that they thought, well, we can do without that. I felt like there was a decision there because
Why do you think so,
Doug
Jarlath?
was doing great. But then I guess they did, in the sense that clearly it came from Kraus. Kraus is like, look at these two teaming up. They're dismissing Tex Winter, one of the best basketball guys I've ever met in my life. And obviously, as we said at the start, that Kraus actually had the light bulb to go, let's get this dude out of here. He's taken as far as he can go with a one-on-one ball. Let's give the triangle a chance.
Well, if we spoke a lot about him last week, but I think the Krauso-meter in this week's edition is certainly tipping more towards green than it is red. I think he's actually come out of this as a winner this week.
We even saw him dancing.
Oh, amazing.
He did the running man.
Yeah, and like, it was the one time I thought they just leave him have his moment, and Scotty still had to have a dig at the end, kind of going, okay, just at the very last second, I was like, oh, they're all getting along great. And then Scotty had to have the dig at the last second. You know, and that was what, 1990?
It was.
They said that, like, every team has to overcome a team. For Liverpool, it's definitely been Man City. And that we have Man City, and they're kind of financially doped team to blame for the dominance of Liverpool. Essentially, we have the Pistons to blame and to thank for the Bulls getting to where they got to being a three-peat team. Because if you look at it, they didn't come that, they could have beaten them. They went 7 games with them there. I mean, if you think about it, that would have been 7 titles. And
they missed Scotty. Like, Scotty was gone Scotty had the migraine. Like, don't tell me you know, they lost by 20. Scotty's probably getting you 20 in that game. So,
yeah,
you know, he was an incredible loss for them in that game 7. And yeah, you're right. Maybe it could have been 7. Yeah. It's, you know, there was so much going on at that time. Even, I think Rodman had a line where he said, life is hard and basketball is easy. So you could tell what was going on a lot with this team at different stages. There was so much going on outside of it, and that's just Jordan alone. Like, Jordan alone is going to just cause you so much. You know, the buses are always, you know, you can't get onto your bus without being people taking your picture, and it's just a circus that comes with Jordan. And
with that, Kieran, right? With that, there's a school of thought, right, that believes that balloon that was growing of you know, MJ's the greatest player in the world, and the narrative of look at these brutes, this horrible basketball that they're playing. Dublin in the 90s versus Kildare is how I would describe it, as a Kildare man. They can't beat you with skill, but they can fucking whack you out of it. I mean,
who was the Michael Jordan 90s Kildare?
Glenn Ryan, without a shadow of a doubt. Nuxer, one or the other.
Nuxer. Nice, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, there was a narrative that was fed there, and there's a belief among, imagine, people in Detroit that, and it's in the Lazenby book, that the Bulls then sent tapes to the NBA of how these Jordan rules were being applied, and how the NBA had to make a decision of, well, how do you want the game to progress? And that if the game was officiated the exact same way as it was during that Game 7 loss the following year, that this wouldn't have happened, and that this title wouldn't have happened in 91, and the roller coaster wouldn't have begun, because they mentioned it, there was no protection of Mike. There's no protection of him going on, and that's why once you tell me if you agree with this, but there is a certain move, along with all of that thing that you described, Kieran, of the madness that surrounds Mike as the celebrity grew, that the referees knew that for viewers to want to watch this, we can't have Michael Jordan getting fouled in the lane. We have to have Michael Jordan dunking on somebody's head. And in many ways, we've seen it play out over the next 30 years, that NBA entertainment is the name of the game. It's why the game is so high scoring now. We have to figure out a way of letting Steph hit 7 threes.
What about Steph and LeBron and these guys? What about them trying to go to the basket against the Pistons? Like Jordan's durability is actually scary, because Rodman and these guys and Lambeer and these guys were saying last night, like, how was this guy finishing off the season? How was he getting through these? Like, we were trying to kill him when he was going to the basket. Like, guys are going to the basket now. Like, I've gone to the basket out in the Castle Island Blitz against Morris Casey, and I'm kind of like, he's coming. This is going to be sore. You know, that does affect what you're doing around the basket. Jordan's gone to the basket for 2 years against the Pistons, and I agree with you in a way, Jarlath, about they wanted to see Jordan dunking it and all that. But I think 50% of it was that, and I think the other 50% of it is we can't have our marquee team winning this way. We like, you know, whoever about Jordan or Magic or Larry or whoever we have to protect going forward. We can't have our marquee team, our team that wins it back to back, playing this type of basketball and with these type of antics. And like, they get their antics overshadowed how good the Pistons were, and how hard Michael and Scotty and Horace Grant and these guys had to work to beat him. These guys had Isaiah Thomas who put up 29 points on one ankle.
They didn't show Isaiah Thomas hit one shot. They didn't show him dribble. They didn't show his brilliance. Nothing.
Yeah, himself and Dumars. Mark Aguirre was, you know, up there with the best 3 men in the league at the time. And then they'd 5 or 6 guys who could play the 4 and 5 that would just break you up. But like, you know, they Adrian Dantley before that. They were a serious squad, that Piston squad. And I think the bad boys, I think we overlook how good they were, you know, as a team. And like, you know, and you know, the other thing as well, looking back on it last night, how great were the rivalries?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you had the Celtics first, then you had the Pistons. The Celtics walked off and the Pistons, and the Pistons walked off and the Bulls. And, you know, everybody had to wait their turn. There was no kind of, I'll sign for a year and jump ship and go with this team and team up with this guy and go with this. Oh, he's my buddy, I'll go sign with him. It was, this is your team. You got to figure out a way to make it work, and you got to go beat these boys. You can't just up and leave somewhere. So, well, I know you.
What did you make of the walk-off, lads? What did you? Because the walk-off is probably one of the defining moments in 90s basketball for the ripple effects that it had on the Dream Team selection, and, you know, the legend of Isaiah Thomas being a prick for the rest of his days, and that team going out with the tail between their legs. What did you make of it? I'm interested to see what your view was as to how it was portrayed in this.
I thought that was a really good editorial decision from a directorial point of view, where they showed Michael the clip of Isaiah explaining his perspective on it, and he was basically saying, "Nah, I don't want to hear it. I know what he's going to say." And Isaiah Thomas, to what you lads are saying, like, the mystique, or whatever the opposite of that is, around this Pistons team is, it affects Isaiah more than anybody else, because the Dream Team thing came right after that, the walk-off, which wasn't his idea, and yet he gets blamed for that too. And I think, like, this is the guy who, he knocked Larry Bird off, he knocked Magic Johnson off, he knocked Michael Jordan off in a row, all in their prime. Nobody did that apart from these guys. And you talk about what Michael Jordan would be like in 2020. This guy was 6'1" listed, but I think he says himself he was more like 5'11". And like, nowadays, if he was a couple of inches taller, I think we're watching a different documentary, because he was an absolute genius. And I think, as the lad said, there wasn't any clip shown of how great he was. I know it's not a Pistons documentary, of course, but I think it's kind of just an outcome of consequence that they came after these legendary Celtics, Lakers teams, and then preceded the greatest team of all time. You know, people say they're underrated, but they're just 4th out of those 4 unbelievable teams, and that's the way of the world, unfortunately.
Jordan is saying about Isaiah Thomas, "There's no way you can convince me that he wasn't an asshole," is a great line. But the killer line is Horace Grant referring to the Detroit Pistons as straight up bitches, is probably the best way to describe it. And then the last thing I want to just touch on before we take a quick break is kind of touching on your point about Michael Jordan being the poster boy of the NBA, and how the rules would be altered a little bit just to ensure that he was going to thrive. I think John Sally is sensational in episode 3 of this. The blueprint was Magic, Larry, and then Michael. Like, just really the only person pointing out here that this was carved in a way that Michael Jordan was always going to be the protagonist of the NBA. We might get back into that in just a moment, because I do want to chat a little bit about the 1991 NBA Finals, about Magic. Let's talk a little bit about Larry Bird as well, because we've got the Dream Team episode coming next week, and I want to chat a little bit about 90s basketball as a whole. Back in a sec. Okay, you're welcome back. I want to talk about the 1991 NBA Finals, lads. This was something that I was really excited to see, just to see Magic go up against Jordan. Last week we saw that incredible montage of the 63-point game against Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics. Personally, I just love seeing Jordan go up against these all-time legends and the predecessors to the greatest current player thrown at that time. And it's interesting how appreciative Jordan is of all of this. And I think at the end of episode 4, we get to see him voice that, where he's like, I can now sit in the same company as Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, and how much he actually appreciates that title and how much 1991 meant to him. Like, we don't get access to this in many other sports, do we? The locker room scene after an NBA Finals. It is just raw emotion. And the first time perhaps a lot of people had seen that from Jordan in 91. So, Jarlath, we might start with you on that. The 1991 Finals, did it evoke kind of the same sense of wonder on your front?
I really feel like, I think I said it last week as well, that I wasn't as clued in at that time. I was the only young fella. So I didn't, the first title I remember him winning was against Portland. And that was only because of all the hype that surrounded the Dream Team. The footage of him with the trophy, I think, is among the most, crying with the trophy is among the most used clip. I think for that reason that Will Perdue mentioned, that all we saw was anger, upsetment, this drive to win, he brought up the question of whether he had feelings, whether he actually had feelings, or if he was a sociopath, to then see the relief. And I'm sure Kieran can speak to this way better than I can, but any sports people I speak to and I ask about winning, all they ever talk about is the relief, is the valve being completely let off. And there's this tiny window where you're not thinking about, and now we go again. And they captured it. They really captured it. And in all its glory there, they only have the photo of him crying with Magic. But I thought it was a really, really kind of touching telling of exactly how he had taken every sling and arrow they had and could now breathe out.
Kieran, what do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I think there would have been obviously a small bit of a fear on Jordan's part after the 3 years, or the 2 years in particular, hard years. And we didn't touch on the Cavs as well, and the Cavs were good. And I like the little insight they gave us into the whole bit of the Cavs stuff as well before the Pistons, obviously. But when you lose like they did to the Pistons twice, and then you get your chance and you beat them, and you saw them celebrating going back into playing after that Pistons one, and saw Jordan out in the runway in Chicago with the fist up to the crowd, and then you lose game one to this storied franchise, the Los Angeles Lakers, and one of the all-time greats, Magic Johnson. And I know he said he was pretty confident after that. They didn't play well, and they felt like they were fine. And the beauty of a 7-game series, it was lucky it wasn't one game that they had to win it. But I could just tell it was huge relief for him, but it wasn't relief that he'd won one. It was probably a bit of both. It was relief that he'd won his first, and he felt like, okay, I have won now. I've won it. I'm not going to be that guy that was the great scorer, the Dominique Wilkins, who was the highlight player, the great scorer, but never won anything. I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going to be the guy that's got one championship at least. And so I think there was a huge deal of relief in that, but also just the fact that it would have been horrific, I would say, from the effort that they put in that season. So they lose to the Pistons, and straight away they're back in their weight room, all of them. Jordan is adamant, we all need to get stronger, we need to get in better shape. So he set the tone day one. They all did it, they all bought in, they all got bigger, they all got stronger, they were all ready for the Pistons when they came. Then they were knocked off the Pistons, and then you're going to have to come up against the Lakers, who were starting the downward spiral. They weren't what they were, obviously. And And yeah, once they switched Pippen onto Magic Johnson, you know, that was it. You could see how much Magic physically was starting to struggle at that time. You know, he didn't have the movement that he had 5 years before that, and
probably
Pippen
had HIV at that time, unbeknownst to himself.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, you could tell. He didn't look himself in a way. He didn't. I know they only showed the clips where he was fumbling about the place, but when you look back at his numbers over that series, he didn't put in. You know, he wasn't Magic Johnson. And to be honest, I think Bird and Magic were very quick, and they were right to be quick to let their status, you know, go to this young kid from Chicago. They knew, look, we're good and we're good at what we do and we've won this many, but this guy is different level. Like, two of them very quickly said it, you know. Larry, I think it's the 85, 86 season where you know, Magic is kind of like going, oh, Jordan's the most talented player in the game. Like, this is 2 years in the league. This guy is, this isn't 1990 where Magic is realizing that Jordan's the best. So I think by the time 1990 came, I think Jordan was ready, and I think he was going to be hard to beat. But losing that first game at home would have been, you know, there would have been a lot of hard words in the dressing room after that, and they obviously didn't look back. But, you know, relief is huge. You know, I felt it my first year with Kerry, but I was in the door 3 years, so I was dropped off the final in 2004, we lost the final in 2005, and I was relieved to win it in 2006. Jordan was in the league since 84, 85, so he
7-year project,
6 or 7 years. Yeah, 7-year project, and a lot of pain and a lot of soul searching, and so you can tell. And he became better. He became better after that one. The monkey was off his back. Now he could just know all that kind of bullshit that people were saying. Oh, he's not a leader. He's only a scoring champion, and like he put all that shit to bed, and then he was able to kind of show for the next 5 or 6 years just how good he actually, you know, to build on his legacy almost.
Ronan, you earlier on brought up the story of the cigars and Denis Rodman going to Jordan's room. There's a quote right after that where Jordan says, Denis leaves me out there by myself because Pippen's not playing at that moment. And I know this is at the entirely different end of the 2 episodes we've watched to the 1991 NBA Finals. But it kind of comes full circle for me in this, because we have John Paxson hitting a couple of game winners, basically. He goes full clutch Paxson at this moment against the LA Lakers. There is trust placed in somebody that is not Denis Rodman or Scottie Pippen, and I think this is mentioned quite a bit with the talking heads involved. Whereas earlier in the 2 episodes, as I say, there was this sense that Jordan was really trying to forward the idea that we were a 3-man team, and everybody outside of that was clearly inferior, and we were the 3 musketeers that would drive this whole thing forward. So I'm not sure where you line that, Ronan, as to what his actual view on that is. He clearly has respect for his teammates, but I suspect that he just sees the 3 boys as a level above everybody else.
Yeah, and it went from him being initially annoyed about Phil Jackson taking over from Doug Collins, because they obviously had a kinship with Doug Collins, who was a number 1 overall pick himself, knew what Michael Jordan was going through, being the most talented player, and Jordan wanted the ball in his hands. But as you said, he matured out of that. He wanted whoever was in the best place to take the shot. Sometimes that was him. Sometimes it was someone else. Paxson, obviously Steve Kerr in a few years' time. So I thought that was interesting. And obviously, Kieran mentioned the Cavaliers game, and all anyone ever talks about is the shot from that game. But I thought we got some real insight into him going over to the beat reporters before the final game and saying, I proved you wrong, now I'm going to prove you wrong. And it just shows like this stupid thing that sports people say, that they don't pay attention to the media, when it's basically impossible. Either you're reading it or someone's telling you about it. So Jordan knew one way or another, and he went over and told them in no uncertain terms. And that Cavaliers game, Ron Harper with the ultimate heat check in this series so far. I think this is his only appearance in the 4 episodes, is it? Ron Harper comes in. He comes in for about 15 seconds. He says, I wanted to guard MJ on that shot, and they gave it to Craig Elo, and I was like, oh, whatever. And that was it. That was his whole contribution. And then straight away, Elo bottled the job. And Harper, I think he would have backed himself, as we saw when he got to the Bulls. This was a guy who was like, I know he probably didn't think he was as good as Michael Jordan, but he had the confidence of someone of that ability, and he would have backed himself to shut Jordan down there. Just
to give the exact Harper line, when he was asked to not guard Michael Jordan, he said, yeah, whatever, fuck that bullshit. And that's it. That is the in and out from Harper during the entire season. It's brilliant.
It was a crazy move, though. Like you've got 2 guys here. You've got Ron Harper, who's, you know, who even when like how many years later, maybe 5 years, 6 years later, is playing with Jordan, and he's still a really good defender. Then this is Ron Harper when he's 24, 25. He's an absolute ball hawking defender. Same height as Jordan, same build as Jordan, more athletic than Craig Elo. It's amazing. It's amazing how, you know, I don't know what was going on there, especially when a guy comes up to you and says, I want to take him. And you look at this guy who's 6'6", long, athletic, you go, okay, there you go, you take him, you know. But
I just hope that's his only contribution. I just hope that's his only contribution. Like, talk about a one and done, best supporting character ever. But
he's a guy you don't hear much of. So I think I'm hoping to hear loads more of him going forward, because I love the way he was just so blunt. Like that's what we want out of this, really, is these guys coming. We've heard the Jordans and the Rodmans and the Pippins, but you know, I think these guys could be the making of this 98, 97 season when they get past building the story up to it.
Yeah, and editorially, again, I thought it was really good the way they closed that episode 4, where you have the juxtaposition of, oh, finally, the Holy Grail, we've won our first championship, to almost like the lethargy of, we know it's coming to an end, and you can see it falling apart. There's a bit of fraying going on. So I thought the director did a really good job there as well. Sort of, it's teed it up.
So that definitely, Ronan, that definitely goes into the category of unanswered questions. Like, why put Craig Elo on Jordan in that situation? That is one. I would put forward that another great unanswered question of both of these episodes is, what the fuck was Luke Longley wearing on his feet in that opening chat with Rodman? I don't know if you saw it. Luke Longley's walking along behind him, and he seems to have, like, not just, you know, novelty slippers on. These are like full-on inflated pillows attached to his feet. I don't know what that was. Am I the only one who saw that, first of all? And the second question that was unanswered was, what did Rodman have against Louisiana? Remember that kid gets given the runners after signing the autographs, and someone says, "Why don't you come down to Louisiana?"
No, it's Nashville.
Like, no,
it's Nashville.
Nashville.
He's like, no, I'm not doing that.
What happened in Nashville?
I would say a racial abuse, probably. I would say
probably, yeah.
The way his tone was kind of like, oh yeah, no, I've been there before. I ain't going back. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know,
does anybody else see the Longley shoes though?
No, I
no. What about? Go on, Ronan.
No, I didn't see them. So I'm that's my first thing after this.
Go back
and check those out. Yeah.
What about BJ Armstrong's shirt? BJ Armstrong's shirt is the loser of this episode so far. Like, it was a complete travesty, to be honest with you.
So, Owen, we need to start up as part of this podcast for the listeners to send in their most memorable fashion moments from each episode of The Last Dance, because there's a few. Like, I honestly am a collector. I realize that now, and I will try and hunt out on eBay most of the unusual items that I remember from the time, that are usually pretty beat up and available from vintage stores. One thing that I've always been fascinated with were these absolutely, like, vomit-inducing trousers that they used to wear to practice. Now, I'll pull them up and I'll post them in a tweet. Yeah. But there's an awful lot of questionable decisions, some of which are now fashionable again. Like BJ's shirt, I was like, I'd wear that shirt. Put a cardigan over the top of that.
Oh, stop, will you? He pulled it off the kitchen table and he put a few buttons on it. Jesus Christ.
There's a lot of questions to do with those fashion choices, I think it's fair to say. And like, I'm by no means a fashion expert here whatsoever. My theory is that 90s fashion was so much better from the waist up than the waist down. Is that a generalization, or am I correct in that? Trousers were shite. The training tops are nice.
Yeah, I guess the pants are always going to change. True. Go on, yeah, the players will wear whatever they like.
They wear whatever, and you know what? They were cool. I don't care whether even though they still look cool. Scotty's walking through with his suit. It's about 4 times too big for him. He's like the coolest guy. He's like Conor McGregor. He's kind of walking through. Some guy goes, "Hey, Scotty, I idolize you." Scotty doesn't even make eye contact with him. He just has the strut on. Like, these guys were walking on air come 97, 98. Like, stop it. They could wear a clown's outfit and get away with it.
I'm immediately looking forward to the John Paxson follow-up documentary, because I'm sure you'll have all spotted he actually had a camcorder himself on the plane. When we're seeing this footage being dug out 22 years later, John Paxson is there with his video camera. And then there's some comment made about what the actual film guy who's filming the documentary is getting paid. So I want to see John Paxson's camcorder footage, no question about that.
I don't think that's going to emerge, because there's footage of do you remember the dunk contest with Vince Carter doing that 360 windmill?
Oh yeah.
And Shaq on the sideline with his
camcorder.
mouth on the floor, and he's holding a camcorder, and the footage has never emerged. Every year he gets asked, "What did you do with it?" I don't know, just pretending to film it or what, or it's in his private collection. But yeah, was it John Paxson or Bill Wellington who had the camcorder?
Bill Wellington.
Oh shit, it was Bill Wellington. Sorry, my bad. Sorry,
Yeah.
It was Wellington. You're right. And yeah, I would pay big money to see that. And the other question I had, as you've already mentioned, is what happened in Nashville with Denis Rodman. This whole thing has also completely moved Phil Jackson up in my power rankings of people I would invite to my dream dinner party. Am I out of my own there? Like, is it a?
Are you into the acid?
I want to hear more about him feeling he's a lion while on acid. This is the dinner party we get to have.
Well, I just looked it up here. Bill Wellington is on Twitter. He's got 30,000 followers. So it'd be quite easy if everyone who listens to this tweets him, or at least follows him and tries to get that footage off him. I'd reckon that Phil would be pretty guarded over dinner. The person you want is Scott Burrell. You really want Scott Burrell, because I heard a rumor that this is something that they pinpointed in this. Scott Burrell is the outsider to begin with, but by the end, Mike fucking loves him. He's an absolute, friend for life.
Yeah, that's actually probably a good shout, now that I think of it. Maybe there's just like a little bit of a tease with Jackson in this, where he like drops the lion story, and I'm like, that's amazing. I can't wait to hear more about this. And the Puerto Rico thing is amazing as well. And I'm like, okay, that's our Phil Jackson fix. That's the whole thing about this entire 10-part series. It's that in a weird way we're going to be left wanting more from every single.
Oh, we are.
I now think the Bad Boys thing is being exercised. I think that was probably the only thing that went beyond saturation point during this. But Jackson, Rodman, I know you're not the biggest fan of the Rodman narrative, Jarlath, but for me, definitely Rodman I could have done with a bit more of. And I think once we get through all the different characters over 10 episodes, we'll all be thinking to ourselves, God, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that guy, for example.
Well, I think it is going to pave the way for more of these long-form basketball documentaries. And this week there was a lot of talk about Kobe filming the last 2 years of his career. That he had a full-on 4K camera crew and sound guy with him at all times for the last 2 years of his career, to the point where he was, staging scenes. There's someone brought this up on the Ringers NBA podcast, that they were at a Laker game and Kobe's crew came on court during a timeout to film him speaking to a referee. So there's obviously a treasure trove of footage there. And, I'd imagine with the year anniversary, that'll be the next big one of these. Now that this one has kind of proven that there's a massive appetite for this.
Absolutely. Lads, we're almost out of time. Is there any final takeaways that we have, or anything that we're most looking forward to about next week? I see you've also got Dream Team on your bookshelf there, Jarlath. So next week is going to fill into quite nicely with Jack McCallum's great book.
Yeah, that's going to be big. I don't know, lads, you tell me, but the Dream Team was the one that it just completely captured the imagination of the world. I mean, it changed basketball, and it changed the entire axis on which the world spun in terms of sports. It changed the Olympics, and as we know, and as you mentioned, Eoin, the interaction between Tony Kukoc and Scotty, and their attempt to humiliate him on the global stage is going to be an amazing story to tell with Tony's input.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Kieran, one last question. Who really are the bad boys? The Detroit Pistons or the Toronto team of the 2000s? That's the only parallel I could draw.
There wouldn't be much into you could throw them all into a room. There'd be a good scrap, I'd say. Although I fancy Lambier and Mulhern at 7 foot just to come out on top of Gormley and Ryan McManaman, but it wouldn't stop them. It wouldn't stop them having it out. But no, they were. look, they're a story team. Phil Jackson, that 20 years coaching, no losing season, was a nice line right near the end of the documentary. I was kind of like going, obviously, he had huge success with the Lakers and the Bulls, but I like the way, and I read bits and pieces of books about him. I like the way he just goes about it. He is a narrative and very much sees, everybody as individual and handles everybody a bit different. And it's refreshing to see that, because I think more so now it's more kind of like we all have to do it this way. Everybody has to do it the one way. There's no space for people to be a bit different within a setup. But I think Jackson, the way he handled a lot of egos and characters throughout all that, both the Lakers and his Bulls team, he did a remarkable job, really.
Did the Tex Winter Phil Jackson triangle offense permeate Irish basketball? I presume everyone started doing it eventually.
I never did it anyway, because I'd never done it. I
Right.
actually enjoyed that bit of it last night with seeing it from overhead and the 33 different variations of it. And it has to be an unbelievable offense for Jordan to go and actually say, here, somebody else have the ball, and I'll go down into the block and I'll set a screen and free up someone, I'll spin, see if I'm open. And I thought that was very interesting, but
it only works in a man-to-man defense. It doesn't work if somebody sets up a zone, and you could play zone in Ireland and still can, right?
Yeah, that's true.
You can. Yeah. But still, like, teams play a lot of man-to-man as well. Maybe teams have run ripples out of it, but I don't ever
remember. It's be ridiculously hard to play it. I mean, there's meant to be like
there's a lot of reads in it. Like, it's an offense. It's set up. It gives you a platform of ways guys can go, but it's actually, and we did a bit of it over the last 2 years with Pat Price. So my first 2 years with the Warriors, when we came back with Mark Burnson, very regimental, come down, call the play, run that play. The guy's going to get it in the block. You give it into him, and he goes to work, and that's the play. We'll come down, we'll run another play, and whereas, with the triangle and with some of the stuff that we've done over the last 2 years with Pat, a lot of it was reads. If you took 2 dribbles, a guy could go back door. You knew it, he knew it. If it was on, it was happening. But I would say that's very much what the triangle is. There's a set motion of it, but everything is reads. If a guy cuts back door, somebody's got to fill his space. Somebody comes across from the top. But you're right in what you said earlier.
5 smart guys there.
And they said that about Rodman. Like, they said when Rodman came in, like, the Rodman came in, and all of a sudden you're going, like, the guys had been doing the triangle for 4 or 5 years when at the stage Denis came in. But one thing that Jordan and kind of, he said, the smart players get this and get the reads of it. And Rodman got it very quickly, which showed you how intelligent Rodman was. And, the triangle offense was something that was huge. And you said it earlier on about it. It's another win for Jerry Krause in this. And I know by the time 97 came, all that happened here was Jordan went to Jerry Ryan, put it to Jerry Reinsdorf. It's me or Phil, or it's Jerry Krause. That's really the fulcrum of what happened in 97, 98. That's it in as basic as you could put it. And unfortunately, I think for Jerry Reinsdorf, he went with Jerry Krause because he believed Jerry Krause could build this all up again for the third time. Whereas, but him spotting Phil Jackson and Tex Winter talking all the time and at chalkboards and talking and figuring it out, you could tell he was like, this is the way forward with these two. And look, it was, and not only did it work for the Bulls, but it worked when he went to the Lakers with Kobe and all that as well. So it's obviously something that's a very good question on, are more teams doing it? It might be a good one to put out there on the social media to see if there's clubs in Ireland using it or have used it. But I never remember coach telling me they're running the triangle, and I never remember coach telling me this is how we're going to run the triangle anyway. So
sure. I'm just curious because it seemed complicated. Like I said, it took them a full year to master it in the first place. So perhaps only I was just thinking your teams and the very top level of basketballers in Ireland would have done it. Like nobody would try it at underage, which is most of our familiarization with actually playing the game.
You could get it. You could get it. You just you probably need a Jordan or a Pippen for it to be as effective as it is.
Yeah,
and maybe not too many people have a Jordan or a Kobe Bryant. Sorry, and Phil's both all Phil's rings came with those guys, and you know the triangle
Can I
looks
ask
great.
you a question, Kieran?
Yes.
Who was in your playing career in Irish basketball? Who was the closest player that came to a Michael Jordan situation of, well, look, lads, he's going to score what he's going to score. That guy is absolutely unstoppable. Let's just focus on letting him get his, and we'll try and control everybody else.
It was for me. It was Ricardo Leonard. I came a tiny bit after. I saw Laverne Evans and Terry Strickland and all these guys, but they were guys that were just missed out in the NBA, and this Europe thing was very new, and Ireland was the first port to call, and we ended up getting Mario Ellie and all these guys that were NBA talents playing in Neptune Stadium and all this. But for me, Ricardo Leonard, when he came to Tralee, you know, he was putting up 50 points a game. He was signing so many autographs afterwards that the following home game, he got baseball cards sent from Old Dominion from his college. And he came up with a genius plan that I'm going to hand out these baseball cards to all these kids and they're going to be delighted. What he didn't factor in was that Irish kids didn't know what baseball cards was. They took the baseball cards off him and then they gave it back to him with a pen and said, sign it. So he made double the work for himself. But offensively wise, he was 6'7". He was an unbelievable shooter. He had huge hands. He could pass out of the lane. He was explosive when he first came out of college, as in he was dunking everything. And he was a guy like that you just looked at and goes, you know, and he could have played like he marked. He beat Alonzo Mourning in a big game, you know, and beat him well on the stats and the team score when he was in college, and you know, probably could have made it to the NBA. Maybe work ethic maybe got in his way. I'm not sure, but when he came to Ireland, he was a hero in Tralee. Still a good friend of mine. But I've often heard that, you know, this guy could have played in the NBA. So he's the best that I would have seen a lot of that I could make an honest assessment of.
Right, very interesting. There's another podcast.
His young fella has just signed. His young fella Ryan has just signed. He played with us the first year we won the Champions Trophy with the Tralee Warriors. He went to high school in America, and now he's just signed with a college. So,
which college?
Yeah, Northern Illinois.
Right. Is he on a similarly prodigious path?
He's really dynamic. He's six. Right. He's a guy that when he went out there, I said, Ryan, just be hungry for work. If you're hungry for work, like you've got the athletic ability. If you work and learn, and you play for 25 hours a week for 4 years in college, you don't know what the limit is for you. So, you know, I'm watching his highlight tapes at the end of each of his seasons in the high school, and Jesus, I can see him growing into himself. He was a kid when he was playing with me. He was only 17, you know, but he was still starting on a Super League team that went to the Final Four and won it. So he could carry on that lineage, and yeah, it's exciting that we've another guy out there.
Just a name to look out for, to say the very least, by the sounds of things. Lads, Kieran, Ronan, Jarlath, thanks a million. Remember, tweet us with your merchandise, good-looking clothes, bad-looking clothes. Probably the bad-looking clothes is what we want to see in the 1990s. I'm sure Jarlath will be pushing all his clothes as well on social media. Make sure to join us next week here on Off the Bull. We've got the Dream Team, and we've got Jordan becoming a commercial behemoth next week. Both very, very interesting subjects. Lads, thanks a million. Chat to you next week.